Alrighty, so I recorded those videos. I was at home, I was walking to work, and it dawned on me two things. That code that I wrote was an error. Now, I'm going to show you in this video how to fix it. But what I want to do is take this opportunity to say, do you know how to fix it? And it's okay if you don't. But what I want you to do, and there's two issues in this file I'll go over, but take this opportunity to see if you can fix it first, because part of learning how to code, right, is learning how to see or how to fix errors. And not that you have to be great at it right now, but the other thing is that because I'm asking you to report to me in the README file, right, were you able to fix them? Part of it is also just being honest, because part of what happens in a class like this, and truly any class, right, is that if there's a quick and easy way to do it, go look at the solution rather than to spend the time. But in a class like coding, true with other classes as well, taking the time to build that skill is really valuable. Okay. And part of this is just like thinking through it, because there was some clear issues. Now, you might wonder, did I do it on purpose? No, not really. I was just coding along and hadn't done that last walk through the code to see that it outputted to the browser, because I was more focused on the arrays and talking about the arrays, which I love introducing arrays, so that was at least fun. And at the end of that video, I was kind of saying, okay, just go play with that code. So I'm wondering, even before you saw my heads up, did you know it, right? And you may have. But again, in your README file, before you watch this video, tell me, were you able to fix the issues? It's not bad. It's not good. Yeah, I'm not gonna give you no points if you didn't. More than anything, it's just for me to kind of check to see, because everybody's at different levels, and that's okay. All right, so let's move over to the code real quick. Get rid of me real quick. All right, so what was the issue? Well, let's look at the output, right? There is no output. Right? And if we walk through it, I can see that I introduced the idea of calculating trip costs, right? Separated that out. And then I pushed those values of miles per gallon and trip cost into the array. Okay. And if I ran the whole thing, right? If I just, even not walking through it, just running it, that's what that button is. There's no output. The reason is because when I did this change here, I no longer called, right? Well, two things. I didn't return a value that could then be passed to update DOM. That's really the biggest issue right there. Now, there's multiple ways to fix this, okay? For one thing, I could, and this might be kind of fun to do right here. I could do it either before or after, okay? I could call update DOM. I could pass it MPG, right? MPG, and I could pass it trip cost, and then I could push those. Okay. Now, if I do it that way, what would need to change? What could change down here? Because if I call it inside of the function, what would change by the way I'm calling it here? So I would no longer have to call it here because I'm calling it from within the function. That's the first thing. So let's just run that through. Oh yeah, there we go. But interesting thing now, right? That actually creates a different problem. Well, it's not really a problem so much. Actually, no, let me let that thing run through. Let's actually walk through it. Okay. So I'm calculating miles. Good. Now I'm passing the miles, the update. Aha. Another problem that creates is that in this case, the update DOM is passing two values. Sorry, when we call update DOM, we're passing two arguments, but there's only one parameter here. So how could we fix that? Well, this would be a fun fix to do by adding some context here, right? I'm going to add a template string that says mileage is, okay, inject the variable here, right? There we go. And by doing this, well, let's just finish it and then we'll talk about it. And trip cost, yeah, I could lowercase those. That'd make more sense. Cost is, and then again, using the $sign, okay? And then I have to end that here so that it actually does become, because what happens here is then this becomes a string, okay? That, well, let's just see it. Actually, let's just see it because I think we have one more problem we're going to get to figure out. Okay, so we calculate miles per gallon. Oh, by the way, we need to come back and talk about that one. Okay, so update the DOM. So now look what happened. And we can even see it even before we get there. Is now the input is a variable that is a string, but in the string we've injected the variables, what we wanted out. Okay, so that looks good. Mileage is 24. Append that. Cool. All right, so we pushed it. So we also, in addition to outputting, we're also pushing that value. And we'll talk about that starting in the next section. Okay, so now we're going to run the next one. Okay, because we're calling this calculate or track MPG cost, which I still think is a really bad name. Okay. Aha, very nice. Okay. So now we got some output, right? And we've got an array with some values in it. Now we could discuss whether that array, which by the way, right now I could roll over this and it shows me the array that's in there. Okay. Let's just do this, my array. Two values, 24 and 81. That's because we haven't run this line yet. So as soon as we run this line, then when I do that again, right, when I look at my array again, now we have 4 values. So this starts to immediately start making you think, well, these are good, but how would I know by just looking in the array? By outputting the string here, it made at least the output a bit more clear, right? A little more usable from the user perspective. And that's something as we gain more knowledge about arrays and therefore objects later, we can talk about that. So that's one way to fix it. You may have come up with a different way. I'm actually kind of excited to see what you all come up with, hoping that you don't just do, but if you do it my way too, that's fine. Now, here's the other thing. And did you think about this? When I calculated trip cost, right? And you can already see the fix because I had figured it out when I got here. I was like, if I calculate miles per gallon times price, would that really be the trip cost? And the answer is no. So there are different kinds of errors, right? So sometimes we have hard errors that stop the page from doing, like it'll not run at all. That's right, a hard error. We have syntax issues that may run, but you'll throw an error. Depending on those syntax issues, they could also be hard errors. And then we have logic errors, right? So in this case, most of this stuff was logic. It just wasn't correct. So instead of miles per gallon, really what I needed to do was to give the cost. To calculate cost, I had to multiply gallons times price. That makes that more represents, of course, the trip cost, and the other one just wasn't right, and I just didn't think about it when I did it. Okay, so now if let's see if there's anything else in here we want to fix. I'm just going to let this run. Cool. So now, how could we verify? This is a good question. How could we verify that these costs are indeed correct? Well, you could go, right? You could say fuel cost. How about that? Fuel, fuel cost per trip. Well, that's a good one. Let's look at How about this one? Oh yeah. Okay. This one assumes you know the how many miles the fuel efficiency is. Okay. So that's kind of a cool one. I like that one. And let's look at the government one's kind of fun to look at, right? So what you could do is basically go look at an online calculator to see if that was indeed correct, right? If those numbers are indeed correct. That's one way to verify that whatever calculation you're doing is that. Okay, so those were the two ways I fixed it. Now, just to kind of ask the next question, right? What good does this array do us at this point? If we're outputting this, why are we placing or pushing things into the array? Right. Well, that's why we need to loop over the arrays. Matter of fact, for now, let's just do this update DOM because I can call update DOM and I could pass in any input I want, but let's say I pass in my array. Let's see what happens now. Okay. Let's let it run. It's like it gives us these values, which by the way, you know how to fix that one? I believe I've talked about that, right? But look at just the values here. It doesn't really from a user perspective. It's like, what does it help them? They don't understand it. You and I, because we wrote the code, we understand at least what these values are, right? Now, could I give them an average miles per gallon for these trips? Could I give them an average cost per these trips, right? Are there, is there information I could give them additionally? And the answer is sure. You'd have to handle the items in this array. You know, you could go through and do calculations. Absolutely, you could do that. That might be a fun thing to actually do before we get to loops. Okay. All right. So that's it. Again, let's see what you guys ended up doing with this. But some interesting changes I did here, right, was I used template strings to pass a string that had variables from the function into the update DOM function. Okay, naming it input, but we know it was a string. So we've seen, and when I did it at the very end where I called update DOM, I actually passed in the whole array. How do we fix? Okay, so let's just end with this. How do we fix this issue right here? Right, because mileage, and it could happen with trip, but trip mileage, sorry, cost probably we don't care. We probably want to see all that, all those points after the decimal. But on mileage, right, we could do math dot round. Let's see what that does to our code. Yeah, so that makes it much more, and probably instead of mileage, I do probably miles per gallon because that'd be just much more. Most people, when they, miles per gallon is kind of the way we talk about it, so it'd make a lot more sense. And now that I've gotten rid of those, now at least you can read this a little easier, right? Maybe increase that font. Okay. So, what I had to do, and if you didn't already do it, if you watched this before you played with this code, right? I want you to play around with this code, right? If you did it before you watched it and then you fixed it, that's cool too. I do want to see when I look at your commits, both, that it was fixed and that you played around with it. That's how I will grade this one. All right, on to the next.